Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about the Super NT, this thing right here. Now this is a follow-up to the NT Mini, which was released last year by the company Analogue, and which is widely considered to be the best possible way to play original NES cartridges in HD. Now this is their follow-up about a year later, and as you might have guessed it, as the sequel, it's designed to play Super Nintendo games. And it's being described as the best way to play Super Nintendo games in HD, similar to how the NT Mini is considered to be the best way to play NES games in HD. Now as of shooting this, I just got this thing. I was lucky enough to be part of the first round of pre-orders, one of the first ones that shipped out, and I just unboxed it earlier, was having a look, and I am really pumped to pop this thing in. Now, as you might have seen in the video title, I'm someone who actually never really played Super Nintendo. And the main reason for that was, as a kid, I just didn't have one. We had the original Nintendo, and then, like a lot of people, we skipped the Super Nintendo and we jumped right to the N64. And even later in life, when I started collecting retro games and retro consoles, I never really was able to get into the Super Nintendo. And the main reason is because it's so annoying and difficult to get an HD signal out of an original Super Nintendo, and really, that's all I want. Now, a lot of old school gamers will say that the only way to play these old games like NES and SNES are on CRT televisions. I mean, and if that's you, that's fine. For me personally, I want to be able to plug my systems into my 4K TVs without them looking like this. And the Super Nintendo is one of those consoles that's very tricky to get an HD signal out of, especially the original hardware. The original Super Nintendo outputs its video through the standard Nintendo cables like most of the consoles, like the NES, the N64, GameCube, whatever, and it's far from an HD signal. If you want to get an HD signal out of the original Super Nintendo, it gets complicated. The console can output RGB. The majority of the models can, anyways. So what you need to do is output the RGB over RGB cables and run this to a high quality upscaler such as the OSSC or FrameMeister, and then that is going to give you an HD signal. And the OSSC or the FrameMeister, neither of those are exactly cheap. And it's like you gotta go through so many things to get a signal. And to make things even more complicated and convoluted, not all original Super Nintendos can actually output RGB, and there are two different kinds that can, one of which is called the one-chip system, which is Nintendo's later revision onto the hardware to make it kind of better and more streamlined, and the one-chip system actually outputs much clearer and crisper video, meaning that you actually want to get your hands on that one if you want to do HD. The problem being, it's actually pretty hard to tell which one is a one chip without opening it up. Now, of course, if you don't want to use the original hardware, there are other options to play these games. The most popular one in this time and age would be software emulation. And software emulation is widely used across the board. It's how you play pretty much any old game. If you download an old Super Nintendo or original Nintendo game to your Wii U and play it on there, you play it using software emulation. Those of you that actually have a Wii U, of course. There's dozens of us! Or, for example, if you have an emulation program and you play the game on your computer, obviously that's software emulation. A lot of other cheap clone systems exist that can do Super Nintendo games, and they also use software emulation, and they do something called ROM dumping. And this is where you put your cartridge into the system and it actually downloads the game file onto the system itself and plays it off of that. So it's essentially the exact same as playing it on an emulator on your computer. The only benefit being, I guess, that you don't have to deal with a computer and it's just kind of a console. And this kind of ROM dumping and software emulation basically covers 99.99% of all clone systems that exist for pretty much every console. If you watch any review on this Super NT, mine or anyone else's, one of the main points that is going to be hit on is the fact that this thing does not use software emulation. So I'm going to talk about that, but first I kind of got to get into what software emulation is and why what the Super NT does is actually better. So the way software emulation works is pretty easy to explain. It's basically a program that mimics the console, in this case the Super Nintendo, and can run game files for that console. Now, there's a lot of different emulators out there, and they're not all created equal. For example, the Wii U has a form of emulator on it that lets you play these old games. If you download one on your computer, that's a type of emulator. In fact, it's a type of emulation if you download a game on any console that is not on that console. For example, if you download the Rare Replay, all of these old games that Rare created, they're played on your Xbox through a form of emulation. And unlike most of the reviews you're going to see on the Super NT, I'm not just going to shit all over software emulation, because it does actually have its pros as well as its cons, and I used to play games through emulators a lot when I was younger, so I do know at least somewhat what I'm talking about when it comes to this. Now, to be fair, software emulation does have a lot of problems. One of the biggest ones that people usually notice almost immediately is the sound is never quite right. Now, this can be minor, such as sound effects like Mario jumping or something like that sounding just slightly off, to entire music tracks just sounding completely off key or not how they're supposed to. Another thing that you're going to come across very often in software emulation, and I've even seen this in official titles on like the Wii U from Nintendo's own games, is graphical errors and glitches. Now, I've noticed this especially a ton on like N64 games. Like, for example, here in my playthrough of Quest 64, I originally started this on an emulator and you can see it here. But this applies to all emulated games, even Super Nintendo, and it's just kind of one of those things you're going to have to deal with. Now, another issue that you're going to have with software emulation is input lag or delay. And again, this is something where not all emulators are created equal. Most of the good ones do their absolute best to eliminate input lag the best they can. And that's because there's actually some overhead that the emulation has to clear between whatever controller you're using, whether it's an Xbox, a PlayStation, your keyboard, and the actual game. It has to translate the commands from this foreign controller into the game. And this causes a small amount of input lag. It can cause a ton if you're using a really shitty clone console or a really shitty emulator, but on a good one it will cause just a little bit. Just enough that you know it's there if you're looking for it. One of the most popular clone consoles out there, the Retron, actually suffers from this a ton, and it's why I personally find Retrons almost unplayable. But again, this is the kind of thing where it's really going to depend on you, and it's another thing where if you've never played the game before, you might not notice it, and there's certain types of games, especially RPGs, where it's not really about timing, where input lag doesn't really cause that big of an issue, but again, it's something that's there. And the final bad thing I'll say about software emulation, and this is the one that drove me wild back when I used to do it, is you never know if your game's actually going to work. You download a ROM, is it going to play? I don't know. But like I said, I'm not just going to shit all over software emulation because it is kind of awesome. It's very accessible and easy to play all of your old games on your computer or even on these other consoles like the Wii U or some on the Nintendo Switch. It makes it very easy and accessible to new people who don't have to go out and buy all this old tech. And I mentioned controllers before, but it's kind of great that you can just pick up any controller you want, plug it in or pair it with Bluetooth, and you can use it in your game. So you can use a Wii U Pro controller to play an original NES game, or use the Xbox controller to play an SNES game. It's kind of cool. Now, I have been talking about software emulation for a while, and the reason is you have to really understand what it is to understand what the Super NT does differently. The Super NT uses hardware emulation, and I know, the word emulation is in there. It sounds very much the same, but it's actually completely different. Cinemassacre did a video about the Super NT not that long ago, and the guy in the video, Ryan, he tried to explain this and he did it in kind of like the douchiest way possible. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of a better job, but bear with me here. So the Super NT, just like the NT Mini before it, uses an FPGA chip. Now an FPGA is a relatively new thing, at least in the gaming world, but these are chips that can be designed to function exactly like other chips in other systems. So basically, the FPGA in the Super NT has been designed to work exactly like a Super Nintendo used to. Now, what does this mean? This means that basically everything runs the way it runs in an original Super Nintendo. Has the same electrical pathways, Hopefully it's a better way of putting it than Ryan put it. It has the same, it just runs the exact same. So it's literally a copy of the hardware. It's not some program trying to interface with this old stuff. It's an actual hardware solution. It's totally different than software emulation, although it is a little bit complicated to explain. So essentially, what I'm holding in my hands here is a Super Nintendo. It's built with newer technology that runs exactly the same way as the old Super Nintendo. That's why this thing's different. And because it does that, it works with 100% of all Super Nintendo accessories and games. Even the Retron can't claim that. It has problems with tons of games that run in weird ways. Well, this thing can play them. And because it uses modern tech, that means there are certain things that you can improve on or upgrade. In this case, it's the video output. This thing outputs over an HDMI cable. It only outputs over HDMI, so if you don't have an HDMI setup, this thing isn't for you. But for most of us modern day people with modern televisions, that's pretty much all you need. And again, this thing claims to have a 100% working rate with all titles. It's supposed to work with EverDrives, or for the Super Nintendo, the EverDrive is called the SD2 SNES. It works with the Super Game Boy player, it works with the Super Nintendo mouse, it works with everything. It even works with reproduction carts exactly the same way that an original Super Nintendo would. Now that being said, it also has the same limitations that an original Super Nintendo has, although there are several special things that you can do with this console to kind of make it a better experience. So I've been talking a lot about what this thing is, what it can do, and why it's different. But as I said, I just got this. I haven't even popped in, I haven't popped in a game. Who knows, maybe everything I've been told is bullshit and it's a laggy shit show. I personally don't know yet. So obviously what I'm about to do is plug this thing in, put in all my Super Nintendo games. I have a big ass stack here, and really give it a go. Now, as I said, I was someone who was never really into Super Nintendo. I was never really able to get into it. I have some experience with it, mostly with the most popular games, but overall, I'm not an expert on Super Nintendo. Now, if you're looking for a side-by-side comparison, obviously, I'm not exactly the best guy to ask, but I am going to be able to tell you how well this thing works, how much I like it, whether or not there is input lag, whether it does work with everything I have, and my overall thoughts on it. And as I said earlier, I'm not somebody who hates software emulation. In fact, I've used it quite a bit. So I'm really curious on how much better this will actually be. And I'm also not somebody who was paid to do this video. I just got this thing, thought it was cool, and wanted to do a video on it. So you're going to be getting a really honest review, honest opinion on this thing. And I'm really curious because, like I said, I never got to really play these games. It was always too complicated, and now I finally can. It's easy, it's simple, and it was at a price point that I can accept, unlike the NT Mini. So yeah, guys, I think I've talked enough for now. We're gonna pop this bad boy in, we're gonna see what it can do, and we're gonna play some games. Alright, so I've had the Analogue Super NT now for about a week, and I've played it almost every day that I've had it. So already you know that I have been having a lot of fun with this thing. In fact, the night where I recorded the first part of this video and then I went and I played Super NT, I started playing probably around 11 p.m. and I kept going until like 4 a.m. So I was just having so much fun with the console. And honestly, it is such a fun experience. I really have been having a good time with it. So let's go a little bit in depth and let's break it down and see what really makes it great. So first off, the games look amazing. They really look good. They're very crisp, very sharp, very clear. Like, I've had absolutely no issues with the graphics. There's various settings that you can adjust on the console itself, such as the resolution, the aspect ratio, everything like that. The defaults that they send you with are pretty good, but if you have a little bit of a weird setup, a weird TV, you can mess around with these. I really didn't have to do much to get it looking great on my TV, and the menu itself is very easy to access. You can access it at any point. One thing that I would suggest is setting your console so that it automatically boots your cartridge instead of going to the Analogue NT menu every time, because it's just not that necessary. Like, I understand why they set it up like that, like a modern console, but if you're a retro gamer, you just want to stick the thing in, turn it on, and play the game. You don't want to have to go through a bunch of menus, and they make it so that you can do that. You don't have to go through a bunch of menus. So I would highly suggest that. And as I said, the games look extremely sharp, extremely clear, and you can adjust this. The reason why I mentioned resolutions is if you're using a non-integer scaling method, normally you would get some shimmer, but there is a setting that you can turn on that will get rid of all shimmer, although it makes your pixels slightly less sharp. So really, it's up to you. Are you going to do exact scaling or what? But the option is 100% in there, and if you turn it on so that you get a slightly less sharp picture, it's a lot easier to set up and a lot easier to set weird aspect ratios. So that's there. The games themselves, I picked a wide sampling because I really wanted to try everything that this console had to offer, and I was not disappointed. I did extensive testing to see if I felt any input lag whatsoever, and I really did not. Like, there was no delay whatsoever as far as I could discern. And as I've mentioned, I'm very sensitive to this. It can ruin a gaming experience really fast for me, probably more than anything else. Like, I can put up with shitty graphics, you know, I've played a lot of PS1. I can put up with kind of bad controls. I played a lot of N64. But when there's delay with those bad controls, that's what really gets me. And I did not have this issue with the console whatsoever. Now, one of the things that I have to point out is I did play this with third-party SNES controllers. These are obviously not official SNES. I could not get my hands on official SNES controllers that were not beat to shit. So I went with a third-party option. This was the best reviewed version on Amazon that I could get, and it worked pretty well. I will say that the D-pad isn't perfect on these third-party controllers, but other than that, I didn't really have that much of a problem, and that's not something to blame on the console. I bring it up though because they do mention that you can buy like official controllers for this console which are wireless, but unfortunately those only sell on Amazon.com. So if you don't live in the US, you can't get these shipped to you. I'm not in the US, I couldn't get my hands on them. It was kind of a bummer, but obviously the console does work with original controllers, it works with third party, it works with whatever you want to put in there, as long as it's made for SNES. So keep that in mind. If you live in the US, great, and maybe later on they'll make it so that the rest of us can also get our hands on the wireless controllers. Would have really liked to include them in the review, especially since they made matching sets for every different variation of the Analogue Super NT, but at this point in time, I couldn't get my hands on them. The console itself looks very sleek, it looks very good next to all my modern consoles. It's very small, it's not that much wider than an actual cartridge itself, and it's not that much longer, which is great. I mean, it will fit pretty much anywhere you need it to. And as I just mentioned, there's a lot of different variations and different colors that you can get of this console. There has been a little bit of controversy about the clear one, because in their promotional images it showed it being perfectly clear, and the actual result is actually a frosted look, much more like an N64 controller or something along those lines. So just keep that in mind, you're not getting a perfectly clear thing. For me, I think the frosted look looks pretty good, and I think if that had been in their promotional material, they could have avoided everything. I think it was mostly just concept designs that they were showing us, and they just kind of overlooked the fact that it's not what their end product had kind of looked like. Just keep it in mind, it obviously doesn't affect your play experience whatsoever. It's really just about knowing exactly what you're getting when you spend your money. So I mean, the games. Obviously the games are what make this console. I bought 2 Mario games, Super Mario Kart and Super Mario World. Both of them were very fun. I had Doom, which was harder to control than I was expecting without a proper joystick, but it was fun. I mean, I had Tetris Attack, which I played with a friend of mine, absolutely schooled him, was a ton of fun. I had a couple really horrible games like Batman and Bart's Revenge. I also tested the console out with the Super Game Boy just to see if that actually worked, and it worked perfectly. The only thing you need to do if you're going to play Super Game Boy is go into the console settings and turn on cartridge audio, and that's because all of the audio for Game Boy games is created by the cartridge itself and does not originate within the console. You can turn this off if you're not playing using the Super Game Boy. It's the only thing that needs it, but just know that you do have to turn it on to play Super Game Boy. And one thing to note is that there can be a little bit of background noise when you use the Super Game Boy, but this is something that was present on the actual SNES. It's not something that's unique to the Super NT. And like I had said before, I mean, the Super NT, it has all the great things about the SNES and it has a lot of the not so great things. This was being one of the not so great things that they unfortunately were not able to improve on, but it's awesome that you can play your Game Boy games. I just wish you could play Game Boy Advance. One of the things that I will mention too, if you're watching any of my game footage or whatever, is I realized I'm really not that good at Super Nintendo, and this is not something that I can blame on the console whatsoever. It's just, as I mentioned, I've never really played it. All I've played were a few ROMs, which really disappointed me. And so yeah, I've got a lot of practice and catching up to do. But considering how good it looks and how fun it is to play, it's definitely something that I am going to invest some time in. If you follow the channel, you'll probably be seeing a bunch of Let's Plays popping up here and there of Super Nintendo games, and I'm definitely going to continue that. It's a really great console, and I'm really glad that we get this HD version that we can play here in 2018. And so I'm going to end this pretty much how I figured I was going to, and if you're watching this, probably how you're expecting it to. The Super NT, an awesome machine. It lets you play Super Nintendo games in 1080p, 60 FPS in 2018. You don't have to mess around with old consoles. It has no input delay. It lets you modify the aspect ratio to look however you want. It works with every single game and accessory that you have. It's really just a great package. I wish I could get my hands on the official controllers. That would probably be my one gripe with the thing. I really feel like they should have sold them on the website itself or shipped with, but I understand they didn't ship with because they wanted to keep the price down. And that's one thing I'll mention is this is expensive. Like, it's not pocket change, but compared to their other consoles, it's way the fuck cheaper. And if you compare it to something like the Retron, which is something that will let you do the exact same thing, but it's pretty much software emulation, it's pretty competitively priced. Like, this still isn't something that you're just gonna up and buy like on a whim, but if you want to get into the Super Nintendo, it's not gonna break the bank, and that's a great thing about it. Again, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that the earlier consoles Analogue released do, but it has HD, it has everything you need. It's definitely going to get you there. Just keep in mind that it's not going to work with your CRT. The Super Nintendo is a really great console, and one that I'm definitely looking forward to getting to know better. And thanks to the Super NT, I'm going to be able to do that in HD, zero lag, to play all those games I've heard all my friends talking about that I never got a chance to. And it's just, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really happy with this purchase. If you're someone who's into Super Nintendo, or you want to be, or if you know someone who's a huge Super Nintendo nerd, I would really recommend this. So yeah guys, that's pretty much where I'm gonna end it. Honestly, after this video wraps, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna play some more Super Nintendo. Come on, Mario, you piece of shit, you can do it, come on. If there's any games that you would suggest I get, or that I didn't try out that you think I should have, definitely let me know, because I'm gonna start collecting for this thing right away. I have like 10, 11 games, and I really feel like I don't have enough. So if you have any suggestions, let me know, I'm definitely in the market. And yeah guys, thanks a lot for watching. As always, I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I'm going to show you how to play your Nintendo Switch on your big screen without using the dock. So if you don't own a Nintendo Switch, videos like this, especially in like the gaming world, and it's usually a video that goes up right when the year ends, or like right when the new year begins. Like I know